Everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. We're going to take your questions live today. I've got a lot of questions in the hopper and the queue, so if you've got those, make sure you go ahead and get those typed in. I'll do first come, first serve basis and answer as many as I can in the time frame. If you missed Tuesday night's show on the history of grain, the serial killers and the history of grain, make sure you go back to our archive and check that out as well. We'll put a link into the feed for you on how to connect with that also. So let's dive into the questions. So this one came in from Donna. She's asking, we talked about antibiotics on Tuesday. So her question was, as far as antibiotics being harmful, I want to ask, when you have to take a strong antibiotic because you have a bad infection, what kind of protocol should you follow to make up for the potential damage? Do you take probiotics while taking the antibiotic or wait until afterward? So that's a great question. So if you're taking an antibiotic, maybe you needed one, maybe you have a major infection that needs to be treated, what should you do from a probiotic perspective or nutrition perspective to help support your gut flora? And the simple answer is high dose probiotic during and after the antibiotic. So if you're on a 10-week or a 7-week course of antibiotics, you want to make sure you're taking that probiotic at the same time. Now, not at the same time as you take the drug itself. So when you take your antibiotic, you want to give a 2+ hour window beyond that antibiotic to take your probiotic, because you don't want to just neutralize your probiotic as it's going in. So while you're on the antibiotic, take the probiotic 2 hours apart at least from the antibiotic, and do that through the course of antibiotics, but also do that 2 weeks beyond completing the course of antibiotics. The product I recommend for this, because it's so high dose, it's over 200 billion colony forming units. Most probiotics are anywhere from 10 to 40 billion. You really want to get a big dose after an antibiotic, ideally. So it's called Ultrabiotic Defense, and we can put a link to that in the feed for you. Great question, Donna. Deanne's asking, any recommendations for the beginning of osteoarthritis? Growth forming on first joints of fingers and toes, noticing stiffness and pain now. Could it be malabsorption of something? Grain, gluten, dairy-free diet. So, yeah, first and foremost, you got to make sure that if you're struggling with arthritis, my advice in general, is to follow the no grain, no pain diet protocol. So that's, you can check that out in the book, No Grain, No Pain. You can also visit us at glutenfreesociety.org to learn more about how gluten can contribute to arthritic damage. So that's step one, is change your diet. As far as the other things are concerned, one of the best things you can do is get your nutrition levels checked, because if you're trying to specifically take certain nutrients to support your joint health, you can have those measured and you can get very, very specific. But in general, one of the best things that you can do, again, in general, is to take a really high quality premium multivitamin, multi-mineral formula. I'm not talking about Walgreens and Walmart brand nonsense. I'm talking about high quality. You can use something like one of my formulas, Ultra Nutrients or Multi-Nutrients would be good options in that regard. One of the other supplements that many people find great benefit in using for arthritis is a mixture of MSM, glucosamine, and chondroitin. And so we have something also called Ultra Joint, which you might find very, very helpful. And then beyond that, it's diet. You've got to make sure you're eating enough and you're exercising enough. So diet, protein deficiency is a major contributor to osteoarthritis, so getting adequate protein in your diet. And then also making sure that you're moving your body with exercise, because one of the causes of osteoarthritis, which is the arthritis associated with overuse and aging, is lack of motion and lack of movement or sedentary behavior. So getting active to increase the blood flow into your joints, into the joint space. Remember, cartilage does not have a blood source. It receives its nourishment through synovial fluid, which is effective if you move. It's ineffective if you sit. So get up and get moving to your tolerance. Okay. Mary's asking, what about collagen protein powders? Any good without tryptophan? I'm not sure I understand your question, any good without tryptophan. There are a lot of great collagen protein powders. We have a gluten-free version at Gluten-Free Society called Ultra Collagen, but I'm not sure about your question. Any good without tryptophan? Are they any good if you don't take tryptophan with them, or are there any good versions that don't contain tryptophan? So maybe clarify that for me, Mary. Amelie, could people with poor kidney function on high blood pressure medicine and chronic heart failure, I assume that's what you mean, CHF, or congestive heart failure, take carnitine, arginine, and magnesium? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing that. None of those supplements are going to impact in a negative way your kidney, and they could have the potential to support your heart and your kidney. So all three of those supplements would be perfectly fine. Can you please post the PDFs that you use in your presentation? So generally speaking, we do. Come over and visit us at Gluten-Free Society. Usually when we do a show, we post the show notes in an article format over at Gluten-Free Society. So make sure you come visit us at glutenfreesociety.org. Subscribe to our newsletter there, and we actually will email those things to you when they're ready. Why do they add so much iron to Cheerios? I make grape nuts for lunch from organic grapes, Brazil nuts, walnuts, pecans, potatoes. Okay. Why do they add so much iron to Cheerios? Because by law they're required to add iron. They're required with all processed grain-based foods. They're required to add iron. It's a law, and one of the reasons why is grains are a poor source of nutrition density, and if you don't add those nutrients, you actually can cause malnutrition in individuals. Now, that being said, I don't agree with the types of iron that they add to cereals. As a whole, they're not super healthy, and to me, avoiding the cereal altogether would be a better option than adding synthetic or chemical ingredients to it to ensure it doesn't cause major malnutrition. I think people shouldn't eat foods that cause major malnutrition and not synthetically try to overcome those the problems with those foods by adding things that they could get from eating other foods. So somebody's asking about our genetic testing. Where are your genetic tests processed? There are a lot of concerns regarding privacy of DNA type tests and who has access. So all of our testing is done in privacy. There is no linkage to other companies. When you use Gluten-Free Society testing, there's no leakage. Nobody's information is sold to drug companies. It's all done with your privacy in mind. We respect your privacy. And have no intention of collecting genetic information or data from people in an effort to profit from that genetic material by selling it to third-party companies. So rest assured, if you do genetic testing through Gluten-Free Society, unlike other companies, we won't sell your information to the pharmaceutical industry so they can profit from the analysis of broad-spectrum genetic studies. Let's see here. Let's see, that's not a question. I'm grain-free but surge in tinnitus, or still have tinnitus, I assume, last few weeks. Thoughts? Lots of thoughts. I mean, there are a lot of causes for tinnitus that are not grain, but one of the things that I see commonly clinically with tinnitus flares is B vitamin deficiency, particularly vitamin B12. And vitamin B2. So those may be things that you might entertain in terms of if you're struggling. Let's see here. I have some respiratory virus and my nebulized albuterol is not helping. Do you have a suggestion of something else that to nebulize? Not really. I mean, to a lot of people, you can learn about nebulizing, glutathione, and you might ask your doctor to write you a prescription for nebulized glutathione as a possibility, but you'd have to have a prescription for it. Some people nebulize hydrogen peroxide. Again, I can't really comment too terribly much on that. But glutathione, a lot of people do really, really well with nebulized glutathione, Margie. Let's see here. Okay, not a question, a lot of commentary. So Let's see, move me down. Can I explain the significance of HLA-DQ numbers? Too in-depth of a question for the short time today. In short, HLA-DQ, there are different markers that we look at. HLA-DQ, there are two primary HLA-DQ genes, alpha-1 and beta-1, that code for an antenna on the surface of your immune system, and this antenna's job is to recognize things that belong in your body versus enemies or threats. And so from a gluten perspective, if you have an HLA-DQ2, 8, 1, or 3, those are the gluten-sensitive markers that when we see people that have those individual markers, we get concerned about their reactivity to gluten, their greater potential to react to gluten as a whole. Let's see. So Sabrina's asking, I agree with what you're saying, though I wonder if grains weren't a staple in American diets before the 1900s. What were the staple foods? Predominantly meat and vegetables. In the U.S. diet prior 1900, staple foods were largely meat and vegetables and seasonal fruit, and not in any degree so much grain until the late 1890s. And then beyond, grain became a predominant form of food that became the major staple. Today, we have a 50% content of wheat, representing the total quantity of calories in the American's diet. 50% of it is wheat. Okay, let's see here. So, question from Robbie. This one was about sunshine. What about those of us that cannot tolerate the intense heat? Look, you can still go outside. You may not be able to tolerate the intense heat, but there are a number of things that you can do. You can sit in the shade and still be outside and still reap the benefit of ultraviolet light on your eyes and on your skin. There are fans. You can get a box fan. You can sit outside and you can let that box fan blow on you. Today they also make misters. You can hang a mister up on your porch, and it just kind of, with a fan, it blows a fine mist that can keep you cool. So if you have a heat intolerance, there's a lot of different options to keep you cool but still be able to go outside. Don't fear the shade. A lot of people think, well, if I'm going to be outside, if I'm not in the direct sunlight, there is no benefit, and that's not true either. Okay. Is there a way to get rid of a dust allergy that causes asthma symptoms? My experience is that people with dust allergies generally will react much less to that dust if they change their diet, meaning that environmental allergies generally tend to calm down. That includes dust when you're not eating food that's poisoning you. So if you change your diet, and the best way to change your diet is to get objective testing to help you understand how to change your diet, so that your immune system is not distracted by your nourishment, right? Because if your immune system's going after food, you're not going to have the resources for it to protect you from the environment, and so you're going to have a major issue with an increased risk of allergens. Now, one of the other things you can do too is use ultrafine HEPA air filtration to get as much dust and particulate out of your air in your home as possible. Aside from the obvious, dust more frequently, have your home dusted more frequently, those things, but air filtration is one of the best ways to keep lower levels of dust in your home as well. If someone has a slow metabolism, is there anything to take to accelerate it? What do you suggest to take to treat? Wow, two questions. What do you suggest to take to treat ulcerative colitis? Say that 10 times fast. So number one, the slow metabolism question. This is from Christina. Look, there's nothing you can take to speed up your metabolism shy of, having your doctor prescribe you thyroid medication. or illegal street drugs like methylphenidate and Ritalin or Adderall or cocaine, right? So don't recommend those things either. Now, some people take caffeine. It doesn't technically speed up your metabolism, but it increases the output of adrenaline from your adrenal glands, so it makes you get that kick or that charge of energy. But how do you optimize your metabolism? You optimize your nutrition. And so what do you take? You get an array, a diversity of whole, real foods in your diet so that your body has a greater ability to process vitamins and minerals effectively from those foods. If you're eating processed packaged foods, you're basically giving your body a harder time because you're eating something that your body. Think of it this way: for every calorie you're asking your body to process, you need nutrients. So if you're eating processed food that contains less nutrients, you're asking your body to give up its storage of nutrients in an effort to process the food that you're eating. But the whole premise of eating is to nourish yourself. So your body's cashing hot checks against the food that you might be eating. So eat whole food and your body won't have to cash hot checks against nutrients. Now, that being said, what can you do? You can take a good quality multivitamin, and that is going to help your body. It's going to help support your Krebs cycle. It's going to help support beta oxidation of fats. It's going to help support the way your body generates energy, which is what most people are after when they're referring to metabolism. So that would be one just kind of generalized thing that you should do beyond eating whole, real food. But there's no, all these formulas that are out there, boost your metabolism, to lose weight. They're all over the TV. They're all over the commercials. All that stuff is nonsense. It's just basically a bunch of stimulants and B vitamins. And so, it's not really any better for you and probably worse for you than something like a heavy caffeinated beverage like coffee. But a lot of those products are selling a false premise to you. So don't buy into the hype. They give you perceived energy because they ramp up your adrenaline, and when they ramp up your adrenaline, they give you that jittery energy, that energy high for a time, but then you hit a crash, and it's in that crash that your body's trying to recover, and it screams at you, and you can get addicted to a lot of those products too. So I just don't recommend them. They're not healthy for you. When I was a young man in my early 20s, I did a lot of that stacking of things that were supposedly supposed to boost your metabolism. So there was a popular stack. It was a mixture of ephedra, caffeine, and aspirin. And all it really did synergistically was it hopped you up. It just got you super pumped. But then there was always a crash. And I did that, again, in my own naivety when I was in my early 20s. And I ended up finding I needed to stop doing that because all it was really doing was putting too much pressure on the heart. So you don't want to do those types of things. Suggestions on headache meds, concerned about hidden gluten corn, getting name brands so it's not made in China or any name brands okay. So if you're, first of all, if you're having to take headache medicines, it's, to me, Aaron, that's the wrong question, and that's no offense to you. If you're having headaches, you need to figure out why, because taking headache medicines is not going to help you. It's going to enslave you to needing a medicine to mask your symptoms indefinitely. So it doesn't really empower you to make any meaningful change. Now, if you're taking a headache medicine once in a blue moon, maybe that's a little bit different. And if you're looking for something that's gluten-free, you really, the biggest thing is brand names. You need to talk with your doctor about the drug he's prescribing or she's prescribing to you. And before you go fill it at the pharmacist, you need to look that drug up together, and you need to look at the inactive ingredients, and you need to make sure you cross-reference that inactive ingredient list with the hidden terms for gluten. And if you don't know what those are, we have an entire article on Gluten-Free Society. Maybe we can put that in the feed for Aaron, on the hidden terms for gluten sensitivity. And you can take that article, you can print it out, hang it on your fridge, carry it to your doctor's appointment so that you can cross-reference before you fill that brand. And find one that might work. But again, I would ultimately say if you need headache medicine on a regular basis, you've got a bigger problem that you need to resolve. And medicine is not a resolution, in my opinion. Is it true that before testing on thyroid, you can't have biotin supplement for a couple of days? Yeah, so if you're getting your thyroid measured by your doctor's wants to measure your blood for your thyroid. Actually, I saw somebody this week with the same problem. They were taking a biotin supplement, and their thyroid numbers were very skewed as a result of that. And so they actually came to me because their endocrinologist wanted another opinion nutritionally. And so that person was taking a supplement that was affecting their thyroid numbers. And so there are two main nutrients that if you're taking in high doses supplementally that can impact your thyroid lab tests, your TSH particularly, and that one is biotin and the other is iodine. If you're taking higher doses of iodine, it can dramatically increase your TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone. I mean, it'll push it well up over the 20s and in some cases over the 100s. So you've got to know that and be off of those nutrient supplements. You know, I would say give it a good 5 to 7 days before you go on and get your thyroid blood work done. Is the appendix part of the lymphatic system? No, the appendix is part of the gastrointestinal system. Predominantly, the appendix is think of it as a backup storehouse for your microbiome. So the appendix, that we believe it's a reservoir of bacteria for the microbiome. And so it's, again, technically not so much part of the lymphatic system as it is part of the gastrointestinal or GI tract. Can Ultra B12 be absorbed by people with MTHFR? Melanie wants to know. Yes. Any of my B12 lozenges, and that's methylcobalamin, Ultra B12, and hydroxycobalamin, those three are lozenges, and what they're designed to do, Melanie, is you put them in your mouth and you suck on them like a piece of candy, and they absorb through your cheeks. And so they bypass, if your gut's damaged, they bypass any damage in your gut, absorb through your cheeks into your bloodstream. And irregardless of whether you have MTHFR mutation or MTR or MTRR mutation, those mutations have zero effect on your body's ability to absorb B vitamins. So there's a misnomer. A lot of people think that because you have MTHFR SNPs or mutation, that you can't absorb the nutrient, and that's not at all true, because the mutation has nothing to do with absorption. The mutation has to do with the biochemical process of how your body goes through something called methylation pathway, and so that occurs after absorption. It occurs in the cell itself. So by the time the B12 is already absorbed before it gets to your cell, and it's where the cell is where the MTHFR mutation can have an impact. So MTHFR and other mutations genetically for B vitamin SNPs have no bearing on how well you absorb the nutrients. They just have a bearing on how well those nutrients, once absorbed, are effective at helping and working inside of you. What is the optimal ferritin level for a 38? There's not an optimal ferritin level for a 38-year-old male, is what I assume you're asking, Silvio. So ferritin should be somewhere ideally between, somewhere in the 70 to 200 range is a pretty safe bet for the average male. But there's no optimal level. I don't really like the term optimal, so to speak, for ferritin, because ferritin, unlike other measurements, ferritin is a measure of iron storage, and predominantly your liver stores the iron. So you can have, the way to accurately assess iron is more than just looking at ferritin, because ferritin is also an acute phase reactant protein that can be released by the liver when somebody's inflamed, and it has nothing to do with whether or not you're overtaking iron. So for example, let's say you're an alcoholic and you're over-consuming alcohol and damaging your liver, your ferritin levels might go sky high. They might go well up over 400 because your liver's being damaged, and in that damage it's releasing ferritin. And again, it has nothing to do with how much iron you're taking. So again, there's context to that question. I don't know if that answer was helpful, but there's not really an optimal level of what ferritin should be per se. But somewhere between 70 and 150, 200 is pretty safe and pretty good for an adult male. Let's see. Let's see. question. I don't know how to answer this question, Margie, but I sometimes empathize with it, and I want to know why so many parents are so, well, your words are so stupid. I would use the word ignorant. I wouldn't maybe use the word stupid, simply because I think a lot of parents are well-intentioned, but they're ignorant of the fact of what they're doing to their children. Stupidity would be, the difference between ignorance and stupidity is stupidity means you know better but you do it anyway, whereas ignorance is you're doing it because you don't know better. And that's why you're here, because you're trying to not be ignorant. You're trying to get more and more educated about these things. But I think a lot of parents just don't know any better, because they're exposed to all the propaganda in the media, all the propaganda from the pharmaceutical companies and the government media medical complex, if you will. And I think it's just unfortunate that they don't have the ability to come out of that. I think it's just, as a society, we've allowed it to get that way. And I think we reach one person at a time, and we can create a whisper that becomes a roar, and we can reach those parents that are acting unbeknownst to their own choices in a manner that's consistent with ignorance and damaging their own kids. A lot of commentary on that. Ignorance is bliss. I don't know that ignorance is bliss. I think ignorance is pseudo-bliss. And really what ignorance becomes is, it becomes big problems for people. When you do something because you don't know any better, hopefully you learn from that lesson. That's what wisdom is, right? It's gained life experience that allows you to become more intelligent in the application of how the world works. And the more of that you get, preferably the less mistakes you make, the less pain and suffering that you have to go through during your life. But I think for some people, they gotta go through those hard knocks. We've all known people in our life, and many of you probably had children that were this way. Some were like easy to raise, and others were like, they got to learn the hard way, and you just have to let them make the mistakes, fall on their face, get up and realize, yes, that you as a parent were actually right, but they had to fall on their face to learn the lesson. And that's just human nature, I think. Let's see here. Well, so we're all these are in relationship to cereal, and talking about feeding children cereal and why parents would do that. Okay, keep going down. Do we have any more on either side there? So another question that came in was, what do I think about house plants in the house? I think you got to be careful, because a lot of house plants, the dirt in a house plant can harbor mold, and that's not to say that and a lot of the molds in the house plant is like Cladosporium, which is less toxic to humans, but not limited to Cladosporium. So, where I've seen people get into trouble with house plants is, when they start collecting house plants in mass, right? And so you've got a ton of house plants in your home with potential for that mold, and then you can run into trouble in that way. A couple of house plants, so I don't think will create too big of a problem. Oh, the question was, what do I say? Oh, I didn't answer part 2. So about ulcerative colitis. So the first thing you got to do if you have ulcerative colitis, you got to change your diet, because ulcerative colitis is an inflammatory bowel disease caused as a result typically of 2 things. One, of what you're eating. You're eating something that's such an irritant to your lining of your GI tract that is creating ulcerations. And so you have to know, really want to get with a functional practitioner to get tested from a food perspective. You can go the route of gastroenterology, you can go to a gastroenterologist, but my experience is the vast majority of gastroenterologists will not talk to you about food, and they'll gravitate toward giving you anti-inflammatories and drugs to block your inflammation without asking why you have the inflammation. And ulcerative colitis, you don't want to mess around with that, because you let it go on, even with the medications. A lot of people end up having parts of their colon removed because the inflammation persists and continues to deteriorate the intestine. So you really want to find out what's creating it. The other common cause or trigger factor in ulcerative colitis are bacterial imbalances, not so much infection, but imbalance. So one of the types of bacteria that has been linked to ulcerative colitis is a type of bacteria called Clostridium difficile. And so it also might be good for you to work with your doctor to have your microbiome checked to see what your milieu of bacteria and other microorganisms looks like, because you might have an overgrowth or an imbalance that's contributing to that inflammation as well. So food and bacterial balance are the two key factors in ulcerative colitis that you want to have investigated, and no amount of medicine will ever fix ulcerative colitis. That will only mask it, and it'll only buy you a little bit of time. So keep those things in mind. After a regimen of high vitamin C per 1 gram per meal to improve status, transferrin saturation was high. It's because vitamin C improves and increases the absorption of iron from the food that you eat. That's the biggest reason why that you probably saw that lab change. Plastics, so Aaron's asking about plastics. Plastics are bad, but it seems impossible to eliminate them 100%. Should I eliminate as much as possible and stay away from BPA? Are there other plastics to stay away from? Stay away from all plastics as much as you possibly can. I agree. It's almost impossible to avoid them entirely because, depending on how your house is plumbed, etc. But you can control water bottles. You can control, plates and cups and forks and other things, and straws and the like. So I would avoid them. BPA doesn't mean anything. All this BPA bottle nonsense that we keep seeing, there are other bisphenol phthalates, and BPA is one type of phthalate. There's BPB, BPC, and others. So don't let the BPA-free bottles fool you. They're not any better for you than the ones that contain BPA. They just have different phthalate in them that's toxic in different ways. So best thing to do is go with glass and stainless steel when it comes to drinking. And make sure you use BPA free or just phthalate free or plastic free cookware or utensils. Should you do a liver detox before detoxifying mycotoxins? Part of a good mycotoxin, so there's three things that you want to be aware of with mycotoxin poisoning or mycotoxicosis. Mycotoxins are fat soluble, meaning they're fat compounds they store in your fat. So one of the things, in order to get them out of you, you need your liver to be functioning well so that it can biotransform those fat soluble toxins into water soluble toxins. And so you don't need to detox your liver before doing a mycotoxin detoxification, but you do need to support your liver so that it can better biotransform those fat-soluble mycotoxins. So that's one important aspect. The other important aspect to a good mycotoxin detoxification program is the right probiotics. The right probiotics can actually degrade mycotoxins. There's a lot of research on this in the animal space, in the farming space, because animals are exposed to a large amount of mycotoxins because a lot of the supply chain for their food is grain, and grain is one of the most heavily contaminated mycotoxin sources in an animal's diet. So, the farming industry's got this part figured out, but like in humans, you'd want to, if you're doing a protocol like that, you'd want to use a solid probiotic. My advice, we have something called Biotic Defense with S. boulardii. That particular formulation works very, very well in tandem with your body as you're trying to pull mycotoxins out. And then the third is a really good binding agent, because mycotoxins can be reabsorbed in your GI tract. So they have a high affinity for bile. So as your liver produces bile binds to mycotoxins, but about 70-80% of your bile is reabsorbed in your distal intestine. And so if your bile's binding mycotoxins as you're trying to poop them out and allowing them to reabsorb back into your bloodstream and take them back to your liver, then that's called enterohepatic recirculation. So those toxins can stay stuck inside of you. So it's very important to have the right binder. I have something in mind for mycotoxins as a binder. We have something called MycoBinder Plus, MYCO Binder Plus, that works really, really well in that regard. Can omega-3 help someone with small herniated disc? So your discs are made out of collagenous fibers. So there's with your disc, it's, a disc, and the center of the disc is something called nucleus pulposus, which is this gelatinous-like material. But on the outside of the disc, you have these crisscrossing fibers of collagen that are very, very strong and keep that nucleus inside the disc from bursting out or from herniating out. And so omega-3 can be helpful for the inflammation that a herniation can cause. But if you're talking about a small herniation, and let's be clear, so there's herniation, which is where the nucleus inside the disc herniates out. And so the chemicals from that gelatinous nucleus can create irritation and inflammation to the nerve roots that exit the spine, and that in and of itself can cause a lot of pain and inflammation. And that's a herniation. It's not the same thing as a disc bulge. A bulge is where the outer layer of the wall of the disc is weakened but not broken, and so the disc might push and bulge out in that area, and that physical bulge might put pressure on a nerve. So that they're kind of two different things, just depending on what you have. If you've got a disc herniation, then omega-3 can work very, very well supporting your body's ability to regulate inflammation. Also, what works well in that scenario can work very well is high doses of vitamin C, high doses of quercetin can be very, very anti-inflammatory when you combine the two. They work synergistically. But if you're talking about a disc bulge, which is, again, there's no nucleus herniating out, physically releasing chemicals on the nerve root, it's just a bulge. What works best for a bulge is physical therapy, chiropractic, decompression, or traction. These are all different types of therapies that can help that bulge resorb back into the disc so that it's no longer pushing into the nerve root. So consider both of those things, and I'd say if your doctor's told you have a small one, it's most likely it's a bulge and not a herniation, but I just wanted to give you that clarity so that you could ask better questions. Angela asks, if you show 2 alleles of the HLA-DQ2, is that a sign of gluten sensitivity? If you have 2, so the question is actually worded improperly, Angela, which is why I'm pausing on it, because you wouldn't show 2 alleles of the HLA-DQ2. You would show 2 alleles that are DQ2 in the HLA beta-1 gene. So the terminology that you've used is just a little confusing. So I'm going to assume what you mean, and if I assume incorrectly, I apologize. But I think if you're talking about the alpha-1 or the beta-1 gene, let's just say you're talking about the HLA-DQ beta-1 gene. Each gene has 2 alleles, and if the 2 alleles you have on the HLA-DQ beta-1 gene are both DQ2 alleles, those both are alleles that are predisposition alleles for gluten sensitivity. They're also predisposition alleles for celiac disease. 99% of all celiacs have HLA-DQ2 markers. So I hope that answers your question. Spirit asks, I live 1 mile down from a donut factory. Can you get glutenized from breathing that in daily? I'd say if you're a mile away, probably not. Although interestingly enough, I did have, years ago, it's probably over 10 years ago, I had a patient who came to see me and was gluten sensitive and worked next door to a bakery, and they shared the same air ducts. It was a shared building, and they just had a partition wall in between. And so anyway, he was getting gluten by all the wheat flour that was being pumped into the air of his workspace, and we figured that out. It took a little while to figure that out, but through some diligence and question asking, we finally did. But that's very close proximity. You're talking about a mile away. I would say probably not something I would be overly concerned by. Okay, so Dahl's wanting to ask me about the attorney that my son and I used as we fought against the vaccine mandate and won with. Yeah, he's a Texas attorney, so if you're in Texas, his name is Briscoe Cain. Briscoe Cain, Cain. Good attorney, and he's also a representative for Texas, and so he's a very strong medical rights activist in the sense that he believes that people should have the right to medical autonomy and freedom of decision making. So his name is Briscoe Cain. Follow up to another question. Which one of your B12 formulas is the best utilized for the MTHFR? So the best one would be methylcobalamin. So that one would match, and be the most effective for you in that regard. So Angela's back with a follow-up on the HLA-DQ questioning. And so if you have two alleles, one be on the, so you're talking about HLA-DQ A1 gene. So the A1, if you have an 05, then that's actually representative of DQ2. I know it's confusing, but A1 gene is different than the B1 gene. And so HLA-DQ alpha 1 of an 05 would be an HLA-DQ2 allele. So you have one positive allele on your alpha 1 gene. And if you have no DQ2 detected on your beta 1 gene, it doesn't mean that you don't have a DQ1 or a DQ3 or a DQ8 on your beta 1 gene. And so I would just say that your testing was inaccurate, not inaccurate, but inadequate. It didn't go deep enough. It didn't measure. That's the problem with a lot of genetic tests. This is one of the big questions I get is, can my doctor order a genetic test for gluten sensitivity? Or will some of these online popular companies, will their tests, show whether or not I have a gluten sensitivity? Because many of them make the claim. Most of these companies don't. They only will show you whether or not you have a positive allele for celiac disease. But you have to remember, there are alleles for celiac disease, and then there are also alleles for non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And most of these online tests don't measure the non-celiac gluten sensitive gene alleles. That's why Gluten-Free Society offers that, because again, it's just such one, it's confusing if you don't understand it, and two, it's misleading if you think that you took a test and they said you didn't have a predisposition to gluten issues, because their test was inadequate at assessing that predisposition or risk. And so whereas the HLA-DQ testing from Gluten-Free Society measures both alpha-1 and beta-1, it measures both celiac and non-celiac gluten-sensitive gene alleles. So to answer your question, Angela, you just don't have enough information from what you showed me. Is it, Mark, man, you always crack me up. Is it dangerous to kiss a jabbed lady if I'm unjabbed? I'm not a single man, but I would say I wouldn't want to run the risk because it's an unknown. I mean, we know, for example, in the autopsies that have been done on folks that have been jabbed, one of the things we're finding is mega quantities of spike proteins in their tissues, in their organ tissues on autopsy. So could it potentially accumulate in your fluid in your mouth? Yeah, it's a possibility. I'm not going to say I can say there's a study that says that that's 100% true, but I certainly would be very cautious, because one of the other things that's passing around and my colleagues, my doctor colleagues in our circles, is that people in proximity, so unjabbed people in proximity to jab people especially females, are manifesting severe hormonal disruption and cycle abnormalities, and so we don't know why. Anybody who claims to know why, I don't think could really truly accurately make that claim, but we do have a suspicion, and that suspicion is that spike proteins can potentially be shedded and transferred from a jab to an unjab. I've heard that nutritional yeast tastes like cheese and wondered if it's safe to eat. I'm not a big fan of using heavy quantities of nutritional yeast. I think, especially if you're new to the gluten-free journey, it's one of those things I've seen gum up a person's recovery. That being said, if you're feeling great and fantastic and you want to use it on occasion, I don't know that would necessarily be the end all of your health, but it's just not something I would recommend as a consistent, healthy product. Can gluten gum up the lymphatic system? Yes. There are a number of studies that show that gluten can cause lymphedema, among other issues. Is it safe to get sclerotherapy if I'm celiac with MTHFR? I wouldn't say is it safe or is it not safe. I think the question I would ask is it the right thing to do? And I think I can't answer that question for you. But being celiac with MTHFR has nothing to do with the safety of that therapy. I'm worried, Teresa says, I'm worried about lymphatic post-COVID issues. Why is there swollen lymph nodes post-jab? That doesn't happen as far as I know with other vaccines. Well, let me just correct you there, Teresa. It does happen with other vaccines. The post-swelling in the lymph nodes occurs as a result of the adjuvants. A lot of the adjuvants in vaccines, they're there to stimulate the immune system. So wherever you're getting injected, you can get swelling of the adenoids, or not adenoids, or of the lymphatic glands, because you're recruiting immune cells to that area where that jab came into you with the adjuvant. The adjuvant is, again, designed to stimulate your immune cells, so you're going to get a swelling effect. It's not uncommon at all with other jabs. It's common with them all. Okay. Is there, what else we got there? If we got any more on our Facebook feed. A question from Buttice, what can we take to boost our children's immune system? Same thing that I recommend for adults, just different quantities. You obviously don't want to give a 3-year-old the same that you would give, a 150-pound 30-year-old. But vitamin C, zinc, quercetin, NAC, elderberry, all good options for immune system support for kids during this time of the year. What else can improve insulin resistance if chromium, B3, and vitamin D levels are okay? Lots of things. So magnesium is one, calcium, inositol, B vitamins, CoQ10, all play a role. B12 plays a role in insulin resistance. So I have a video, Silvio, you might want to check out. It's what your doctor won't tell you about blood sugar. So if you type that in and use my name, you should be able to find that in our archives. And that video goes through a multitude of different nutrients that help your body properly process glucose, insulin, and the energy from the breakdown of Krebs cycle and carbohydrate breakdown. Is there a way to get rid of excess lymph, I assume you mean? There's a lot of ways to get rid of excess lymph, but probably the best way is to allow your body, your blood vessels to resorb it and get it out as a fluid. Exercise being one of the best ways. Infrared therapy, if you don't sweat, infrared's a great way to sweat. Sweating, movement, rebound trampolines, dry brushing, those are all ways to help with lymph flow. Is there a benefit to vibration plate if not well enough to exercise? Yeah. If I would just say this, a vibration plate is not going to exercise for you. Vibration plates are great because they'll move fluid through you and they'll help stimulate your bone and your muscle, but you don't want to just stand on a vibration plate and think that you're going to count that as exercise. You really want to move on that vibration plate. So if you're not capable of doing aggressive exercises. So, for example, you can do a half squat on a vibration plate and just try to hold that half squat for 15 or 20 seconds, again, depending on your level of strength and your level of physical fitness. You don't want to just stand there, though, on a vibration plate. You want to do specific movements on the machine to reap a greater benefit. And again, a lot of people just stand on the plate and think that's miraculously going to help them become more fit or healthy or increase their bone density to a huge degree, and it won't. It's the movement plus the vibration that really has a synergistic benefit. Okay, did I miss any? Oh, here we go. I missed a whole bunch. Sorry, Facebook. I've been ignoring you guys. When you do food sensitivity tests, what antibodies do you like to look for? It's not just antibodies, Gaia. So there's IgG, there's IgA, there's IgM, there's IgE. There's also something called immune complex. There's also something called a T-cell response. So to me, if you're really going to be accurate and comprehensive in assessing food reactions, you have to look at all those things. And most doctors that I have seen, I'm not going to say all, but most that I've seen, most people that come to see me have brought me tests from prior practitioners and docs, and most of them are running IgG. Sometimes they run a combo of IgG and IgA, but that is not going to be comprehensive in terms of its overall ability to tell you what you should or shouldn't be eating. What should a person consume post-prednisone for autoimmune hepatitis? So I'm going to assume you took prednisone to get the inflammation under control. I would say, Kurt, if you're dealing with autoimmune hepatitis, I've just never seen a case of autoimmune hepatitis where gluten wasn't a major culprit. So the first thing I would say is not what you should consume, but what you shouldn't, and that would be grain. So get grain out of your diet, at least based on my experience. Beyond that, you should know, if you've been on chronic prednisone, that it blocks vitamin C, calcium, magnesium, and vitamin D. So those supplements, supporting your body with those supplements might be very helpful if you've been using long-term steroids. What are my thoughts on bariatric surgery and malnutrition for the long term? I think it's a terrible idea. I think bariatric surgery is a huge mistake. I don't care how morbidly obese you are. I think when you block a big chunk of your stomach, you block your body's ability to absorb nutrition, and that can be lifelong. And when you do that, the consequences are also going to be lifelong. And there are ways to lose weight. Most of the people that I've ever seen that were getting ready for bariatric surgery, I get a lot of folks that come in and they want to get their nutrition right before the surgery. And when we get their nutrition right, they lose so much weight, they generally don't need the surgery. As a matter of fact, last week I had a woman, she had lost 60 pounds, and so she no longer qualified for the bariatric surgery. And so what her doctor told her, get this is crazy. Her GI doctor told her she needed to start eating ice cream and candy to increase her weight so that she could be eligible for the bariatric surgery. Now, what kind of nonsense advice is that? Here this woman is taking the effort to empower herself and to get healthy, and her doctor's telling her to eat ice cream and candy so she can gain enough weight so that he can make whatever the $20,000 or $30,000 it is on the surgery, and without any care or consequence to her long-term health. I thought that should be malpractice. That guy should be reported to the medical board, but anyway, it probably will never happen. Gene says eye twitching. Did you say it was B12 deficiency? No, magnesium deficiency, Gene. Eye twitching, typically like the eye twitch, shoulder twitch, leg twitch, those types of twitches are typically either just overall electrolyte, water loss, electrolyte imbalance, potassium, chloride, magnesium, sodium, or can be magnesium. A lot of times it is magnesium. If you're intolerant to gluten but you don't have any reaction to dairy, would you still suggest a sensitivity food test to make sure that your immune system's not acting? I would, because there's a type of reaction called a delayed hypersensitivity response, and so the window of reactivity can be as late as 3 weeks, and so it's not always obvious. But the other reason specifically for dairy is dairy has a type of protein in it called caseomorphin. casein morphin acts like morphine, so it can actually, if let's say you are reacting to dairy and having an inflammatory response, but because the casein morphin acts like a pain reliever, it masks the toxicity of the dairy, and so you're not symptomatic when you consume it. And that's another reason why dairy, just like gluten makes a morphine-like protein as well called gluteomorphin or exorphin, but these morphine-based proteins can mask the toxicity of the food, and so dairy and gluten are the two that we know can do that. So definitely I would get tested, food sensitivity tested. As far as which one, I think we're going to have ours ready. The one we have a technology that measures all the things I've talked about today, and it should be ready here in the next few weeks. I think our team is finalizing it now. I know I've been talking about this for months about how we were going to have availability of delayed food sensitivity testing, but we are right on the threshold of being ready to have it done. So stay tuned, because we're going to make that announcement here very soon. Can you speak to how much K2, K7 is needed to match each 1,000 IU of vitamin D3? I don't subscribe to that camp, Douglas, as far as you need X amount, mainly because I test people. So it's very frequently that I'll run testing and I'll find vitamin D is low, but vitamin K is perfectly fine. And so I won't give extra K just because I'm giving D to somebody. So, I know there's a lot of talk about don't take D without K. I just don't subscribe to that theory of thought. And mainly the reason I don't subscribe to it is the vast majority, I'd say 90% of the people that I test in my clinic don't have vitamin K deficiencies. They have vitamin D deficiencies. And I don't want to give more of something than is what is necessary. One, because, I think that we should strive to get the vast majority of our nutrients from the food that we eat. Two, I don't want to over-supplement somebody when they're coming to see me, because people can very easily get pill fatigue. There's just so many options and so much information that everybody wants to take so many different things. You have to narrow it down to what a person needs and not generalize. Diane, I have yeast in my ears, have been on low or no sugar for months, no grains, no dairy. I was just on a probiotic a few weeks ago to help with yeast overgrowth. Any other suggestions? I don't know if you followed up with your doctor, but that'd be a great place to start. If you've got yeast in your ears, I mean, is it yeast? Can you confirm that it's yeast? Did you have a culture done to confirm that it actually was yeast? That would be a place to start. If you're certain it's yeast, there's certainly a lot of different things that you can do to support microbiome, but so for example, there are things you can take that have antifungal properties like caprylic acid, horsetail, and among other herbs. But if you've got yeast coming out of your ears, it's time to quit. It's time to go see a good doctor. I'd say go see a good functional doctor to help you with that, because sometimes what they can do is very beneficial for you during a culture is they can do what's called a sensitivity test. So if they culture yeast from your ear, they can then challenge that yeast with different agents to see what would kill it best. Because if you're already doing some things to try to knock it out and it's not going away, then it could be that it has that yeast that's growing in your ear could have some resistance to some of the natural or prescriptive agents, and you'd want to know that. So getting it cultured would be a smart move. Lee wants to know if I have any products or protocols that I use with clients when struggling with Sibo. I'm so, Lee, there's not I don't have a generalized, hey, do this if you have Sibo, simply because there's different reasons why people can develop it. But I would just say if you're just trying to get general with it, number one, follow no grain, no pain. Because the vast majority of cases I've seen of people that had a prior diagnosis of Sibo and they came to see me, they recovered with diet change. And so diet change has got to be at the top of your list. As far as supplemental products, one that a lot of people have had success with is berberine. So I do have something called ultra berberine, and I also have a blend, and it's a blend of different herbals, and it's called Microbial Balance. And so you might check that out as well. And then one other thing is the right kind of spore-based probiotic can sometimes be very, very supportive. So we have something called Biotic Force that you might look into. So Deanne wants to know what kind of tests do you recommend for a person to determine the best diet? It's a multitude of tests. It's not one test. So it's several, because there's not one test that can just magically tell a person what kind of diet. So I can't say, go do this test, Deanne. How were gluten genes found? Chris wants to know. Originally they were found as a result of years of research on people with celiac disease, and so what they found was they were looking at the genetic patterns in celiacs to see if there was any kind of genetic component to the onset of the illness, and that's how they found originally the DQ2 and DQ8 genes. Can food intolerance and allergies cause severe body aches? Yes, Uzma, absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt. That's why the name of my book is No Grain, No Pain, right? Aches and pains. Is it a good idea to use a lot of protein or none? I've seen info both ways and wondering your thoughts for past exposure to mold. If you're trying to overcome mold, depends, Sally, because mold, if you have mycotoxin, heavy mycotoxin exposure, like in the family of black mold toxins, they're called trichothecenes, and there are a number of different types, the verrucotoxin, satrotoxin, etc. These are kidney damaging toxins, so they can damage your kidney. So first question that I would say, in order to answer that question, we need to understand how your kidney function was performing. Are your kidneys in good shape? If your kidneys are in good shape, you need protein to recover from chronic illness. I don't care who you are. The only time we would look at being concerned about protein, quantitatively speaking, is if somebody was in kidney failure, and then we might have to be more careful about how much protein or how we delivered that protein to them, because it's going to put the kidney to work, a lot of protein. Now, I do err on the side of higher protein if we're generalizing, meaning that a person who's chronically ill and is trying to recover, all things being equal, kidney function being great, that person needs to probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.8 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, because you've got a lot of repair to do, and protein is the hallmark baseline for that repair. I'm having a horrible time finding the other ingredients for moxicillin. So Gene, if you're having a hard time there, go to the pharmacy and request a consult with the pharmacist and have them sit down with you, and they'll teach you and they'll show you how to find those other ingredients. It shouldn't be too terribly hard. You might have to go through that effort, but it's definitely worth your time. Jessica wants to know, when will you be doing part 3 of your mold topic? It's coming. Actually, I've got, dozens of hours of we're doing a documentary on mold, a very comprehensive one, and so we're kind of in the middle of the process of that, and so that's part of the reason for the delay. So I don't want to give you an exact date, but we're working very diligently on a comprehensive resource for people who are in mold to be able to navigate mold in an objective way without all the subjective, my neighbor said do this, or my cousin Vinny said do that. Like, we want to make sure you have an objective resource for navigating mold, because it's just a monster. Is there any way to treat a very low white count caused by severe liver inflammation and an enlarged spleen? I mean, you don't treat the low count. I mean, if you go to a medical doctor, you treat the low count, and they usually will use some type of bone stimulating drug, depending on the severity of your low count, depending on other factors. You ask a different question, Kurt, which is, why is the count low? The count is low for a reason. The spleen is inflamed or enlarged for a reason, and the liver is enlarged or inflamed for a reason, and you have to ask a different question if you want to find a real answer. The fundamental difference between a doctor like myself and kind of a general medical doctor, because I'm not a medical doctor, is philosophy. Medical doctor wants to treat your symptoms with a series of chemicals or medications, surgical procedures, etc. A doctor like me wants to ask why your symptoms exist in the first place, and what is it that you're doing in your life that's contributing to the existence of those symptoms. And so one of the major contributing factors to a person's illness is food, it's diet. And so that's a great place to start, is just by analyzing diet first. Because white counts can be low because I see this all the time in vegetarians and vegans. Their white counts are low, Their livers are inflamed. Why? Because they're not getting adequate vitamin B12, and you need B12 to stimulate the bone marrow to produce white blood cells. So I mean, there's 1,000 different potential reasons that we could really draw out as to why those things happen, but that's why objective testing can be so beneficial and helpful in that kind of a situation, because you want to ask why. You don't want to just ask, what do we call it? And again, that's a diagnostic-centric model of medicine, which is, here's the name of your disease, and here's the drug to treat it, versus, here's the name of your disease, yeah, okay, great, but why does your disease exist? Because, you know, for every case of white blood cell anemia, you might have a different reason as to why that white blood cell anemia exists. I mean, B12 deficiency could cause it, zinc deficiency could cause it, folate deficiency could cause it, gluten sensitivity could cause it, mold toxicity could cause low white counts. So there's just a lot of reasons as to why that might be happening, and that's why it's better to ask why instead of declaring what to call it. Does peppermint help leaky gut and tight junctions? Not really. You know, the only thing that really truly, I say helps a kind of a broad word. Peppermint soothes the GI tract and soothes the lining of the stomach, and it can relax the sphincters in the stomach. And for many people, peppermint actually creates gastric reflux or acid reflux. So it's not something that I would say is a great tool if you're trying to figure out why you have leaky gut. Peppermint, in my opinion, is not a solution. Why would celiac serology be high if I'm on a totally gluten-free diet? That's a great question, Kay. Several reasons. One, you might be getting cross-contaminated through something that you're not aware of. Two, you might be eating a product that they haven't discovered that it has gluten in it, and there hasn't been a recall, and so you're getting exposure again without knowing it. Number three, you might have one of the gluten-mimicking substances affecting you, creating a crossover, leading to an artificial reading on anti-gliadin antibody levels. So those are the main three reasons. So some of the things that can mimic gluten, as an example, one is a yeast overgrowth. If you have a yeast overgrowth, yeast produces proteins that mimic gluten and can cause a similar type of antibody response. So again, those are just different reasons. You might just want to talk to your doctor about investigating those further. Will taking collagen help with either herniated or bulging disc? It definitely be supportive, Sabrina. I think ultimately, though, you know, collagen is going to provide the background nutrients to help a disc with what it needs to heal and repair. But why did the disc herniate? I mean, it could be that you lack nutrients or lack protein, but it could also be that you had a physical trauma or an injury. And so in that regard, you know, having again, a good chiropractor, a good physical therapist, you know, somebody who knows what they're doing in those two arenas might be an invaluable resource for you to recover that as well. Why is there no boron in ultra nutrients? Because we have to make the decision on how big the capsule is going to be, and what's the quantity of nutrients per serving, and how many other nutrients that we could put in or not put in. So we have to prioritize. And so ultra nutrients has no boron because, as a priority, it didn't take the front burner over the other ingredients in the product. What's the best protocol for Sibo? I think I already answered that question. Oral thrush. What would I recommend for oral thrush? I would recommend that less of a recommendation and more of a commentary that people that have oral thrush or that have yeast overgrowth generally have immunosuppression or they're immunocompromised. So again, the bigger question to answer that would be, why are you immunocompromised? Because generally yeast are opportunists. They will grow and they will grow out of control when your immune system can't keep them at bay. In my experience for oral thrush, one of the biggest common reasons why that actually develops is antibiotic use. Antibiotic use compromises the immune system, and so as it compromises the immune system, it allows for that microorganism, that candida, typically with oral thrush it's Candida albicans, to grow aggressively because it suppressed your immune system by suppressing and depleting your microbiome, your good bacteria that create competition for yeast. I think follow-up question on D with K. I thought it was necessary for it to absorb. No, you don't need vitamin K for vitamin D to absorb, or vice versa. I don't know where you heard that or where you learned that, but that's just not true. If an elderly woman doesn't have an appetite, what can she take to eat more? I'd say start with smaller increases in calories, because a lot of reasons why elderly women would have a lower appetite is because they've slowly deterred themselves off of calories, so they're eating less and less as time goes on, and the stomach will shrink in response to less calories in the diet. So it's increasing the caloric load a little bit at each meal, maybe 50 to 100 calories, so that we can get an expansion of the stomach over time. The other thing that you may consider is that sometimes people have appetite suppression when they're too hot. And I know we're in the middle of summer right now, and it's been a hot one. And so, heat suppresses the appetite. Caffeine suppresses the appetite. So if the elderly woman is drinking caffeinated teas or caffeinated beverages like coffee, then that might be something that you look at reducing or pulling back away, or waiting to consume until after the meal is consumed. Best protocol for somebody who's low in intrinsic factor. So intrinsic factor is basically it's a carrier for vitamin B12 produced by your parietal cells in your stomach. And so if you don't have enough intrinsic factor, which is a type of anemia called pernicious anemia, where those cells have been damaged. It's an autoimmune condition. One of the ways you can bypass the stomach and you can absorb vitamin B12 is through the cheeks. And so again, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier with the lozenge. You can do a methylcobalamin is one of our products that I would recommend, but it's a lozenge, and so it absorbs through your cheeks and bypasses the stomach if you don't have enough intrinsic factor to absorb it. Okay. So, Dr. Bentley, can you comment on Saccharomyces cerevisiae and the relationship between nutritional yeast as a driver in ulcerative colitis? I don't want to answer that. So, there are certain species of yeast that they can also, so I mentioned earlier with ulcerative colitis, you have two primary drivers. You've got nutrition in terms of what you're eating as being an irritant to the large intestine, and then you also have microbial imbalance. And microbial imbalance can be caused or contributed to from a multitude of different arenas. And I was talking earlier about nutritional yeast, and one of the reasons why I don't really recommend it, and this is one of the reasons why, is I'm not a fan of it, because it can be a driver of inflammation in the intestines. So I don't know if that clarifies or helps at all, Wade. Let's see here, Emmy. I have a friend who's 80 and was put on Elavil at age 23. She has tried numerous times to get off them, but is unable to get down past and lower level, and then usually big relapse requiring her to up it again. She can't sleep without it. She wants to know if you have seen any types of success with getting off of these drugs in someone who's been on them this long. Yes, you just have to do it right. This is number one, you've got a drug addiction issue in that equation. You've created a habitual problem biochemically that the body is needing that to basically sleep. So part of it is the weaning process needs to go extremely slow. So I don't know what you've done for a weaning process, but in a lot of cases, work with your doctor and start with either 5 to 10% reductions incrementally. Don't go 25 or 50% reduction. Go super, super slow. So work with your doctor to get that worked out and discussed. But beyond that, you've got to ask, why did you need it in the first place? So there may be some triggers in the first place that were leading to the sleep disturbance that still need to be resolved, because you can try to wean all day long all you want, but if the original problem of why you weren't sleeping in the first place that led you to take the medication is not resolved, then no amount of weaning or making an attempt to get off is going to be successful. So you've got to ask. other questions about why the sleep was disturbed in the first place. Okay, man, we're 15 minutes over, and the questions are still coming. So hold those for next week. We'll be back next Thursday for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. And make sure you join me as well on Tuesday for Dr. Osborne's Zone. We've got more great shows and content coming up for you. And hey, if you've not subscribed yet, do that. Go over to glutenfreesociety.org, subscribe to our newsletter. It's free. We'll send you all kinds of great information. And, whether you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, or any of the other, social Twitter chat channels, make sure you like, subscribe, and share with as many people as possible. Remember, our goal is to help save 100 million lives, and I can't do that without you. So have a great week. We'll see you next time.